Back to Meadowlarkers 52, the CC Sabathia episode. We're good with that, right? Right, guys? We got Tom Haberstroh here, Amin El Hassan. No Howard Bryant this week. He's not going to pull any sort of archaic number 52s from lore. What do you got for us, Tom? Do you have a 52 off the top of your head? It's a tough spot to be
don't.
in.
Yeah, sorry.
Buck Williams.
Does
Buck
this mean that I have
Portland
to
Trailblazers.
leave now? Am
You're
I
done.
relegated?
Okay. Ray Lewis.
Ray Lewis. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look in the chat box if the producers want to give me any more. Okay. We'll call it the CC Sabathia episode for now. We got the basketball Illuminati guys here, which makes sense because I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe this is about Daryl Morey, Sixers GM. I'm not sure if it's about Daryl Morey, but the jumping off point to this conversation was Kevin O'Connor's piece at The Ringer. Daryl Morey changed the game, but he still hasn't beaten it. And I find Daryl Morey endlessly fascinating, going back to his Celtics days, through the Rockets to now where he is with the Sixers. Just to start off, before we get into like the basketball, the analytics, what it means if he wins or doesn't win, the moves he's making, are they similar to the Houston moves, or has he changed things in his philosophy? Those are kind of the things I want to talk about as well. But there was one anecdote, y'all, in that piece on The Ringer about Daryl Morey getting so many tickets on his Lexus that it, and this is in Houston, that it eventually got booted. And his solution was to negotiate a deal with the Lexus dealership to buy a new Lexus if they would take ownership of the old one and deal with all of the tickets. Like, does this map onto Daryl Morey for y'all? Does this and does this sound like a thing that he would actually end up benefiting from? Is this a good thing that we should all like? What is this here? Talk to me.
I think as someone who's known Daryl for quite a bit, he is kind of like this automobile weirdo. Like, he very early on of the Uber movement, he like told me one day that the world is just going to be a bunch of Ubers. No one's going to own cars anymore. It's just, you're going to walk outside of your apartment, walk outside of your house, and just wait for an Uber to show up. And that's going to be the way the world is going to operate in 10, 100 years, whatever it was. And so this story has been kind of passed around, not this particular Lexus one, but the one where he is late to a flight and he just kind of leaves his rental car in the terminal and just says like, hey, you go deal with that problem. This is kind of a thing for him. And I thought the way that anecdote was going to go, I mean, I don't know if you've heard this one, but a friend of mine refuses to pay for parking because the cost of one day getting a parking ticket is less than like the risk of getting it, like paying your $2 every time you go in and park somewhere. Like in the long run, it actually is net zero. Like you're actually going to pay it off just by not paying that ticket. I thought that's where that story was going, but Daryl Morey,
next level,
the whole, hey, you deal with the boot is incredible.
I'll be honest. I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could pass off your fines to a third party and that they would handle it. Or what happens if you don't own the car anymore? Do you still respond? I would think that the tickets would stay on your record, not on the car. But then again, how would they know whose car it is? I don't know. It was fascinating. I have subscribed to Daryl Morey carlessness in my travel. I haven't rented a car probably in a good 4 or 5 years at this point. At some point, I just said, why am I renting a car? So I have to park it somewhere. So I have to worry about it. So I have to sit in traffic. And most importantly, and I think Kevin's excellent piece hits on it, the time I spend behind the wheel of the car is time taken away from me doing other things. If someone else is driving, I'm able to handle my commute more efficiently. I'm able to read texts and reply to people and watch videos and get on phone calls and be distracted and not have to worry about what's happening around me. And
it sounds like he's doing that even when he's driving, though.
Yes.
Which is a little bit concerning. Not to mention, there's like some alluding to the fact that maybe he was cool just parking in handicap spaces as well. I wasn't quite sure. He
I
was willing to
mean,
park anywhere, is what it said, regardless
but
of
but
the
it's
markers.
but the crazy thing is, Kate, is that's Daryl Morey, right? He's someone who is constantly looking at the risk reward balance of every single action. And even I'm not promoting parking in handicapped spaces, but even within that context, the risk reward of I can park in this spot and get the $500 ticket, or I can not park in this spot and be late to whatever it is I'm trying to get to, is what I'm trying to get to worth $500 to me. And for someone, and again, he's not working, at Subway as a sandwich artist or whatever they call them, right? This is a guy who's making millions of dollars. In some way, like, okay, tow the car, whatever. It's more important for me to be somewhere where I need to be than not and be late. But again, it all goes back to centers around the risk reward proposition and his eternal search for it. I think the best version of Daryl Morey is someone who challenges conventional wisdom, challenges the way we think about things, and is constantly searching for a better way to do them. The worst version is exactly that, is parking in a handicap spot because the risk reward says, yes, you should do it, not understanding there's an intrinsic cost there that may not show up financially that makes it way worse than you should. And by the way, he's had those kind of behaviors within his NBA management as well.
Yeah. Well, before we get to the actual basketball, I will say one element of the story that I appreciated that I attempt to exploit when I'm driving, but it doesn't always go well, is if you've read like data analysis of like highways, there's two lanes often. Let's say it's a 2-lane highway and there's the shoulder on the right and the shoulder on the left. And if there's a traffic jam and we're not using 50% of the road, we're all just, there's a lane on the right, there's a lane on the left, no one's using them, and we're all stuck in traffic. And like when you try to be the person that pulls out and creates the new lane, it's risky to be that person. You don't know if you're going to get pulled over. You don't know what people are going to do. I think Daryl is that person. He's like, I'm creating the new lane.
Kate, have you ever driven with Amin before?
No,
like
it sounds like he
driving.
Ubers now. No, I haven't.
Amin is that guy too.
Scary?
No, I'm not. I am not that guy. I'm not.
I have never seen a more aggressive driver, and that's a compliment. Amin, that's a compliment. A more aggressive driver than you. Like never.
I attack the gaps. I do not do the shoulders because the shoulders are there for a reason. They are in case of emergency for vehicles to pull off. If everyone starts using the shoulders, guess what? Now it just becomes a lane. Now, if an emergency happens, we don't have a wherewithal or a conduit to get out of that. It's much like tanking, like or sitting. Excuse me. It's much like sitting your stars in a national TV game because it's better to rest them, to load manage them, which is all good if you're the only one doing it. But when everyone does it, it becomes a problem. So I don't do that. But what I do is I do attack market inefficiencies, like gaps, like people fall asleep at the wheel, like people texting, and I will jump those gaps because it all adds up in the margins, ladies and gentlemen. Don't let them tell you, oh, you'll be waiting in traffic anyway. No, I won't, because all those margins add up, and then you're stuck at a red light, and I got through it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before we get to the basketball, you call it attack the gaps, and my wife calls it punking people. Like because I'm similar to you. I mean, like, if there's some sort of merge because there's construction and no one's going in the lane because they know they have to merge left, I'm like, well, that's a lane until it's not a lane.
You take it until it's not a lane. Thank you very much, Kate Fagan.
Yeah, she hides her eyes and she's like, here you go, punking everyone again. And I'm like, okay, sometimes I'm actually punking them, but in that case, I'm just making the smart move. But I'm going to start calling it attacking the gaps.
So you think Daryl Morey is punking the NBA?
No, I mean, Kate's wife thinks that.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm attacking the gaps, like a good player. Okay, we'll go. Maybe we'll stay on basketball. We'll see what happens. My big question after coming off of reading this article is similar to the question we talk about with a lot of NBA stars. Like it's one that was around Barkley or Chris Paul. Is like, and now we'll apply it to Daryl Morey. What do you all think about this idea that a general manager's career and his impact on the game and his legacy is validated if he wins a title. Because this is different than a player in some ways, in that it's validating that the way he constructed teams, creating this new lane for how you create teams, actually worked. Where do you think he needs that to prove that he is a true sort of savant basketball mind? Amin, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, I think you rightly pointed out with Chris Paul, Charles Barkley, among coaches, we see it a lot. Mike D'Antoni is one that catches a lot of that flack. Well, how good could he be if he's never won a championship? And yeah, I guess, I never thought about in front office ways. Most of the time, general managers are kind of the guy in the dark that nobody really knows. Obviously, in the last 15 years or so, as fans have been more sophisticated in their knowledge of the workings behind the scenes of how these teams get put together, there are people who are more high profile than others. Daryl's certainly one of the most high profile. Masai Ujiri up in Toronto, Bob Myers in Golden State, but Rob Pelinka, of course, in LA. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of people who would struggle to name the general manager of the Portland Trailblazers or of the Los Angeles Clippers or of the Charlotte Hornets, right? There's some names that pop and some names that for whatever reason don't. And so I think it's a little less prevalent on a front office level, but it's prevalent with Daryl for two reasons. One, because Daryl's style is so radically different. His approach has been so radically different, and everyone always wants to push down the hair that stands up against the grain. And then second of all, Daryl is very front-facing, right? Yes. Very front-facing. One would argue that Sam Presti is every bit as radical and, pushing the boundaries and the limits of how to think about how an operation should be run. But Sam Presti's notoriously, close to the vest, behind the scenes, paying no attention to the man behind the curtain. Whereas Daryl is more engaging. He's more out there. He's more willing to put his name out there. He engages on social media, and those things, there's a gift and a curse. What's Bill Simmons' name for him, Tom? What's he called?
Dorkapalooza. Well, Dork Elvis. Yeah.
Dork Elvis, right? Like that. The dork part speaks for itself, but the Elvis part is the cult of personality, is a celebrity that Daryl Morey carries with him.
Yeah, there is no GM that I can think of that is active on Twitter and outspoken on Twitter and going on the record a lot of times with media and going on radio shows. I mean, he has a sense of humor. If you hang out with Daryl Morey, you recognize that he is not like this cold-hearted accountant through and through. Like he does. There's articles after articles about how he has an affinity for the theater. And I remember
an affinity.
Yeah,
that's putting it lightly. The guy wrote a musical.
Yeah.
Wrote a musical, producing it, and hands-on, like going to Denver to be there for opening night of Small Ball, a musical that he has very much been the brainchild behind. So I think when you look at Daryl Morey, like there are dynamics to him that run counter to the idea that he is just a cold accountant, right? And that he doesn't have people skills that other GMs, every GM is different, but I do think that Daryl Morey, he runs the Sloan Conference. He's a big theater buff. I remember Kevin Arnovitz telling me that like he will be on the phone with Daryl Morey for 30 minutes and 27 of those minutes is about musicals, about theater. And it's just, this is what he nerds out on. He's like winning basketball games and theater. So there's different dynamics to you. And that's not suggesting that he's going to have a political career one day, but I do think he is politically outspoken, as we saw with the tweet that just lit up a huge political firestorm and a financial firestorm for the NBA a few years ago. Daryl has had 15 seasons in the NBA as an executive and has never had a losing season his entire career.
Tom, you know what shocked me the most out of the article is that he has the fourth highest win percentage of any general manager with a minimum amount of seasons. That blew my mind. I knew he'd been successful. I knew they'd never had a losing season, but I didn't realize it was that extent.
And as KOC, Kevin O'Connor mentioned, is like the three above him have championships and he does not. So that has been elusive for him. And we can talk about the idea of whether like that should be the goal, is like Daryl Morey, even though he's never had a losing season as the executive of his teams, and they've had many formations. It is not just James Harden. It is Aaron Brooks and Chase Budinger and Kevin Martin leading a winning team, right? There's the Dwight Howard era. There's going to be the Joel Embiid era. There's the Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming. There's different formations and evolutions of Daryl Morey's basketball. But I kind of think it's ironic that Charles Barkley is kind of his nemesis in the media, because I think there's some similarities in the fact that Charles Barkley never won a championship, but I think we recognize how great he was as a basketball player. Don't have to belittle it down to the zero on his ledger. Whereas I think Daryl Morey has a chance to be remembered the same way. Amazing executive, polarizing, but I don't think that 0 championships will define him much in the same way that Patrick Ewing, John Stockton, Chris Paul. It's not the defining characteristic or the defining trait. It is definitely part of the story, though.
Well, I think the other thing is also when you talk about players, you're constantly being compared to your peers. Who's the greatest power forward of all time? Well, it's Tim Duncan and then Kevin Garnett. Wait a second. When I was growing up, is it Charles Barkley or Karl Malone? Yeah, but neither of those losers won a ring. So ipso facto, they get dropped in the power forward rankings. And like that's the cold cruelty, is that Charles Barkley, who at one point was the most unique, again, going back to what you're talking about, Tom, the comp between him and Daryl Morey. It wasn't just that Charles Barkley was a great power forward who didn't win championship. It was that he was so different. He was a 6'4" power forward who could dribble and was fat and out of shape. And we'd never seen anything like it. And his greatness is undeniable. And again, up until the early 2000s, the answer to who's the greatest power forward of all time was one of two names: either Karl Malone or Charles Barkley. And it said a lot about you with which one you picked, right? And now here we are, probably, I would say 2003 on is where the Duncan stuff really took, people said, okay, now the guy's got 2 rings. So if you think about it, in 20 years, wow, 2003 was 19 years ago. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's crazy.
In 20 years, Charles Barkley has been gone from arguably one of the either 1A or 1B to you don't even belong on this list. And that happens again and again and again in our, sports fandom hierarchy, players and which positions and, or greatness of a player overall, right? How many people say that LeBron can't be the greatest player of all time because he only has 4 rings and Michael Jordan has 6, right? That is a constant in the way we talk about great players. I don't know if that's a constant in the way we talk about great front office people. And I think it allows for someone like Daryl to retire one day and look back and say, I had a hell of a career. We won a shit ton of games. We had a chance to win championships. Ultimately, we didn't get it. Any disappointment over not having a ring is internal. It's not hearing it every day about this bum never won a ring. You don't have to hear that as a general manager, even a high-profile general manager like Daryl Morey.
You know what I'm thinking of? I mean, as you're talking right now, and both of you might have more insight into whether this is true, is that there is no debate over what has happened on the basketball court. I mean, I know we debate it, but I'm saying we see it, it's there, like we know who made a shot, who missed a shot. Whereas I find that when it comes to front office people, there's a lot of similarities between Silicon Valley and front office people, in that there's myth making, there's legend making, there's origin story. Like, it's as if whoever can plant their flag in the ground is like, I'm the person who drafted so-and-so. Like, I'm the one who made this decision, even if it was a team decision, even if you weren't the one who drafted that guy, but you were the GM at the time, but you wanted Sam Perkins instead of Michael Jordan or whatever it is. I feel like there's a lot more of like who controls the storytelling. And I think, I mean, obviously we've already, by all of the anecdotes we have about Daryl Morey, he is a legend at the storytelling that goes into a front office like origin story. Is it not that simple? Like, is that, were you ever in a front office or heard a story of like so-and-so's taking credit for that, but we know that wasn't them. We know they weren't into that player, and they're out there acting like they're the one who drafted so-and-so first.
All the time.
Okay.
All the time. That happens all the time. It happens. Guys will also, once a guy's on the team, an assistant coach will work with them. But if the guy starts blowing up, a different assistant coach starts working with him and try to take credit for the blow up or whatever. That happens all the time. The NBA is a credit demanding system in a lot of places. But speaking of the origin story, I did not know. I thought this is what I thought Daryl's origin story was. I thought, yes, he'd been hired by Wick Grosbeck to help them in ticket sales and kind of find efficiencies there. While he was there, he started working on some basketball stuff and then was kind of a half and half guy and kind of started putting the vibes out there that he'd like to lead a front office. And instead, I was shocked to find out he actually was mostly business side, a little bit of basketball, and that a headhunter picked him out of like, yeah, that guy. Like, I didn't know. I thought he was kind of someone who had built a reputation on the basketball side and hence got plucked, not like someone like Les Alexander just taking an absolute stab at a dog. Les Alexander, the former owner of the Houston Rockets, who flew Daryl Morey out for an informational interview and by the end of the day offered him the job. Yeah. And that's such an incredible risk take, right? I mean, he said himself, Daryl Morey said himself, like, this must be a mistake. They're asking for me.
Yeah, I'm interested in Tom because when I started in the league, covering the league, it was 2007, and Daryl Morey's myth had already been written. One, I'm acting like you're like, you're like 70 years old here. What do you remember about 2003? Were people shocked when he got hired? And also, have we had in the NBA as radical a hire as that, as like a GM, not somebody underneath since then?
You ready for my Boston Red Sox background to come through here?
All right.
You ready for this?
Here we go.
Do it.
Yeah.
You have to remember the time. This was when Theo Epstein and Billy Beane were becoming household names, and the kind of rock star status that Theo Epstein, after winning the 2004 World Series, and Billy Beane, and I don't know when exactly Moneyball came out, but I'm
the book
sure,
or the movie.
Oh, I know the book when the book came out.
Yeah, the book came out in 2004.
You remember Brad Pitt? Yeah, he wrote the book.
Yeah, that's right. He's the author.
Movie was 2011. Yeah.
So the idea of Moneyball by Michael Lewis becoming this just cult favorite, bestseller, and wait, who's going to be the guy in the NBA to do that? So Daryl Morey came into the NBA as kind of the chosen one of the Theo Epstein type, who was why is it called the Sloan Conference? Well, because its MIT Business School is called Sloan. He went to the MIT Business School, and then therefore, when he has the Dorkapalooza, as Bill Simmons calls it, and he is Dork Elvis, it is housed at a business school. And so the idea that he has taken the NBA and created himself I wouldn't say he created the myth, but the idea of him coming in isn't so out of left field when you consider the sports context of Theo Epstein and Billy Beane. And he was the next in line. So I think it's interesting also is his number two in the Houston Rockets front office was Sam Hinkie, who is the poster child, the face of tanking, and the face of this cold, calculated, soulless executive that tanked above all human emotion and just said, we need to get to the bottom because that's the best way to accumulate talent, the most cost-efficient way to accumulate talent. And Daryl's never done that. And so, and Sam Hinkie, while he does have a Twitter account, he refused to do media. He hated doing media. And Daryl is the opposite. So there are similarities and differences, even though they come from the same organization.
I'm disappointed that there was only a glancing reference to his love of ping pong. Are you familiar, Kate Fagan, with the story of Daryl Morey and table tennis?
No, please enlighten me.
Okay, so I don't think they do this anymore, but every year at Summer League, Warren Legary had this charity event, and it was built around a table tennis tournament. And he'd have like table tennis pros there to be refs and also like do in between matches. But the idea was all the people signed up were NBA people, and you'd have coaches, you've had general managers, and you'd have players. I believe I've seen Rondé Hollis Jefferson play. I've seen Dennis Schroeder play. But like the creme de la creme of the table tennis circuit in the NBA world, Rick Carlisle, Bob Weiss, Daryl Morey. And Daryl will show up. And Tom, call me a liar if I'm lying. In like, everyone else is like, hey, it's a night out. We're going to have drinks afterward. Like wearing a t-shirt and some jeans. Daryl shows up in shorts and an Under Armour shirt and a headband.
Yeah.
And he is here to dominate. He's not here for your fun and games or your open bar. He's here to dominate that match.
Like,
do you think he's doing it ironically, like the headband, like a nod to
like the Richard Tenenbaum or something like that? Like he wants to be.
Movie.
Oh,
or is he self-aware about it? It's unclear.
I definitely think he's self-aware of how ridiculous he looks, but also given what we know about risk-reward propositions and Daryl Morey, I could see him sitting there and say, yeah, it'll look funny and everybody will laugh, but also it gives me great mobility. It's sweat wicking the shirt.
Yeah.
The headband is absorbing, keeping the sweat out of my eyes. Like I can see him doing the analysis of, I'm going to dress like this because it gives me the best chance at winning.
Yeah, some social costs, but I'm gonna just absorb them. Let's go back to what a small nugget in Kevin O'Connor's article that you both seem to be surprised by, that he said Daryl Morey said 15 seasons in the NBA, all of them winning. How do you assess the value of that on one side of the ledger and an NBA title on the other? Not from an emotional standpoint, but as people who understand front offices, I would assume most front offices would say, if you promise me 5 consecutive winning seasons or 4 losing seasons and 1 title, what is the actual balance there about the value of something like 15 winning seasons?
What's interesting to me is that this Sixers team is a bunch of players that also have no championships. You know, it's not like he's finding people who have been to the mountaintop and wants to build around that player. Joel Embiid and James Harden have not won a championship, and these are the face of your team. Like he has built a Twin Towers with players who are still trying to climb that mountaintop and win. And you know, I think in 2018, they won 65 games in the regular season. They went up 3-2 in the Western Conference Finals.
Mm-hmm.
And then Chris Paul gets hurt. And then they miss 27 straight threes. And then they lose, right? I don't think people really remember the 65 wins that Mike D'Antoni won that regular season or that team won. I think they remember the 27 straight missed 3-pointers. And it gets to your point of the fact that you lose or don't get to the finals matters more, I think, in the social conscious or the Twitter conversation than the actual 65 wins and came this close to winning the title. I do think that this is true for NBA players, that winning that one championship changes everything. I just don't know if it's the same for Daryl Morey.
But one thing we talk about a lot, I mean, is sports to win? Like yes, the fans remember the 27 missed shots, but if you had a full arena for 82 games because you had a good team, like, is that the calculus that a general manager, Daryl Morey is in a different plane because he's made himself more forward facing,
right,
that we should be assessing?
I mean, I think one of the things to keep in mind also is that at the end of the day, as a general manager, you don't play the games. You don't, and you have both enormous control and very little control on what happens in the games. What I mean by that is the Houston Rockets players that played in that game, they missed those shots. They missed those shots and they made the decision to keep taking those shots. Regardless of what coach told them, regardless of what the general manager and the organization told them, our philosophy is, They, at the end of the day, have the control to say, this ain't working, I'm doing something else. So they kind of have to live with that, right? Or even if they stuck to the game plan, you missed 27 shots. Many of them were wide open. Trevor Ariza and PJ Tucker and James Harden. You guys missed those. You didn't make those shots. So they have to hold that. They have that control. The coach has control. Why'd you keep playing that guy? I grew up a Knicks fan, and I remember Game 7, Rockets-Knicks, and John Starks can't hit the broadside of a barn, and Pat Riley stuck with him. And we were screaming, put in Hubert Davis, put in Hubert Davis. And he put in Hubert Davis. It was too little, too late. But the idea is that he let Starks go 2 for 13. He had control in that situation, regardless of why he made his decision. The general manager does not have control on a day-to-day. I can intimate to the coach, hey, I want you to play so-and-so more. I can intimate to my players, hey, it's important for you guys to play this way. But I have no control. My control happened in the offseason or at the trade deadline or on draft day when I assemble these pieces. Once they're out there, I bear very little, I don't want to say responsibility, but how much influence do I have on what happens on the court? So, and for that reason, I feel like, winning means a lot, because it's like, I put together teams that were incredibly successful. But when you talk about the nitty gritty of those moments, a Game 7, a playoff series, I can't do it all. I mean, at some point, we all recognize James Harden's a great player, and Chris Paul's a great player, and Mike D'Antoni's a great coach. But it's my fault if they don't get the job done.
So I think a lot about this moment after Eric Spoelstra and the Miami Heat win the 2012 NBA Finals. Like, the confetti's coming down. They're showering each other in champagne. Everyone's smoking a cigar, having a great time. And in that euphoria, Eric Spoelstra texts Mike D'Antoni and says, thank you. Because of Mike D'Antoni's influence on the game of basketball, going small, making Chris Bosh a 5, and having him shoot 3 so that Kendrick Perkins, playing for the Thunder, has to make a decision. Am I really going to go out to the 3-point line and defend this guy? Mm-hmm. I can't do that. And they win a championship. And the influence that Mike D'Antoni had revolutionizing the game and 7 seconds or less, and recognizing that there's another way to play that can win basketball games. Other people might take that and win championships with it. And Eric Spoelstra was humble enough, I think, to say, that wasn't me. The credit goes all to Mike D'Antoni and others before me who made it okay to make those coaching styles.
All right, and absolutely, that's another point. For as radical as we paint Daryl to be, he's merely the latest in a line of people who are avant-garde or think different, but in a particular way. So Daryl built upon what we did in Phoenix, which was we shoot threes, we get layups, and we get to the free throw line. We're efficient at those 3 places. It wasn't as clinically kind of deliberate as what Mike D'Antoni's offense would become in Houston, but that was just it. We knew what we wanted, and those were the shots we wanted. Our kind of style of play was influenced by Rick Adelman in Sacramento, those Vlade Divac, Chris Webber teams with a lot of motion and spacing. Again, they had a 3-point shooting was a part of that. That's influenced by Don Nelson, right? The positionless. I have a bunch of 6'8", 6'9" guys, and who cares who's the center, or I'll have my center Jack Sikma shooting jump shots, or whatever. And sprinkled in there's Rick Pitino saying, I'd rather shoot, 30 shots from 3 and shoot 30% there than shoot 20 from 2 and shoot 50% from there. There's all of these people who contribute to what ends up being the formula, to the point where Eric Spoelstra wins a championship shooting threes and playing positionless small ball basketball, and nobody makes the connection between that and Mike D'Antoni in Phoenix. They'll never win playing that way, or Don Nelson or Rick Adelman or all those other things, right? And then fast forward, Golden State wins with an even more bigger 3-point kind of emphasis, And we don't make those connections. That's the sad part of the game. But again, I think if you're Daryl Morey, to sit back and say, yeah, I mean, I know I do. I didn't win a championship in Phoenix, but I look around and I see how many teams try to play like we did. I'm like, fuck yeah, we taught you guys how to play basketball. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Tom.
Just real quickly, that Moneyball movie at the end talks about Billy Beane never won it, but Theo Epstein did, right? And using a lot of the same blueprint, sabermetric blueprint that Billy Beane never won with, the Red Sox with much deeper pockets ended up winning that World Series. So I think in the same way that Daryl Morey, like Amin said, might see the revolution of the 3-point shot in today's NBA as kind of his fingerprints all over that.
Let me ask you a question, Tom, because I don't think that Kevin O'Connor's piece addressed it. I don't see it addressed a lot of places, but when in talking to people who have worked, particularly on the coaching side, in Daryl Morey-led organizations, there is a feeling that, I know as affable as he is in real life and in interviews or whatever, he's not good at the interpersonal part with regard to other areas of his domain other than his staff. So they talk about the summer league dinners and all that stuff, but that's him and his guys. The example I can remember is there was a player who was told he wasn't going to get an extension because no one was going to get an extension. And then someone else got an extension. And so this is the front office being maybe not so straightforward in how they communicate things. And rather than Daryl go down there and talk to the player and be like, look, man, like this is the business, whatever. You basically told the coaching staff, yo, that's your job. You're the coach. And that's one instance. I've heard multiple instances of that, of things that happen. And it's like, well, coach, go coach him up. And like, that's not coach. We're talking about a guy's contract. We're talking about promises that were made to him, not by the coaching staff, but by the front office. Tom, have you heard any criticisms like that about Daryl and maybe a lack of a human touch in some areas regarding to players and coaches?
For sure. And I think when you look at Daryl Morey's resume, he might be like, yes, so what? So what? I've won 60% of the games. I have the 4th highest win percentage as a GM, and maybe I'm not the best people person dealing with those things, but I win and the players get paid and they win championships. Not yet, but they win. They get very far in the playoffs. So the question is, for me, if he has a weakness, that is it.
Right.
That is it. I don't think it also helps his reputation in the league when he sends a referee audit about the 2018 playoffs and essentially protesting because of how many points they lost due to the referee calls. And it looks bad because it leaks to the media, whether he leaked it or whether someone else did. And it looks like he is just trying to hack his way through a game and not really actually winning on the basketball court. It's excuse making and all that. So there are definite blemishes on his resume. And I don't know. I mean, I guess my question is, every team, every GM has issues with interpersonal conflict. I mean, you look at the Golden State Warriors and Draymond Green punching Jordan Poole. And I would also say Steve Kerr and Bob Myers might be the very best at that in the NBA. So I guess my question is, how much does that matter?
Well, I think it matters in the sense that, and this is a larger sports conversation, I believe, because we do this a lot where we say, well, I don't know if that's the best way to go about it. Well, it produced this, like, let's use Daryl as an example. 60% of our games were won. We have a 60% win percentage. As if to say, if you hadn't done it in that particular way, that number would be lower. We never could seem to consider, could have been 65, could have been 70 if you were better at this, rather than this is the reason we won this much. This is the reason why we only won this much.
Right. And that's, I think, one of the big questions I had reading this piece and looking forward to the Sixers season, this coming Sixers season, is just that exact question you're getting at, Amin, which is like, yes, he's won 60% of his games, but along with that, as I've watched the NBA since Daryl's been a GM, and you see his teams historically not live up to their potential, right? I'm not saying like analytically piece for piece, but I would say the general impression is that they aren't. Then the question I always have is, if this clinical X's and O's data approach, maybe it's the coldness of it that is killing him. To your point here, I mean, like, maybe it doesn't matter that, there was some bad interaction with somebody, but you think you're in this place now where it's like every little bit seems to be mattering at this point, because it's certainly not having talent. It's certainly not that. It's like, what are the intangible things now? And that's what's so fun to me about Daryl Morey now, is it's going to be the intangibles that get him a title.
Right. And Kate, the article even mentions it about Shane Battier and Jeff Van Gundy used to argue with him about the merits of chemistry, and Daryl is talent over everything. And of course, the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? You need talent. Like, if you don't have talent, forget about ultimate success in this league. But that stuff matters. And to me, if I had to contextualize what Daryl's biggest flaw is, at least from a strategic standpoint, from what I could see, is Daryl almost views team building, roster building, as like baseball, like the game of baseball, a series of individual events, discrete events. And like, every transaction is a transaction to be won in and of itself. But there's a bigger picture that has to be formed. And there's a bigger, I don't know what the word I'm trying to look for is, a melt of all of these things that have to come together. And so while you might win the battle of, I really lowballed the shit out of this guy with his contract, ultimately that stuff comes back to haunt you, in the same way that while you might have won the battle of parking in the handicap spot and maybe not getting caught, or getting caught and paying $500 that I could afford, there is a larger war that you are maybe taking an L in because of your decision to win this small, discrete battle.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Daryl, he's 50 years old. I was stunned by that. I thought he would be like 50.
I thought he was older. Not because he looks older, but because he's been around.
He was 33 when he got the Rockets job. I was like, what?
Yeah.
33. And
when I was 33, I was writing for ESPN like $100 a pop.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think that next evolution, right? I think that's he's I think young enough as an executive that I would hope there is a growth factor, or somewhere where he can grow into that understanding. If this doesn't work with James Harden and Joel Embiid, I'm not so sure he has another route to take other than how do I augment my weaknesses? How do I fix this? How do I hack my way into being a more complete GM or a complete decision maker? And I think, he being on the young, I don't know if he's young. What is the average age of the president of basketball operations in the NBA?
Man, that's so
maybe
wild.
We'll get that in a couple minutes. Jeremy's gonna Google it.
Jeremy, start number crunching. But Tom, here's another way to think how he augments it. You asked. I think it's by surrounding himself by people who are not like him. And that was a funny thing in the article. KOC mentions his GM tree, right? Gerson Rosas and Arturas Kornisovas and Sam Hinkie and Sachin Gupta and Monty McNair. And with the exception of Hinkie and Gupta, all those other guys, I think, are more basketball guys than they are analytics. Like, I don't think Kornisovas is a big data head. This is a guy that played for Lithuania's national team and been an international scout or whatever. It's like that's how he progresses and develops. Daryl does, is by surrounding people who are not like-minded in him and finding the middle ground with them, and they leave and they become better. But in theory, he should become better as well. And I think he has made a lot of progress in that regard.
Well, before we get out of here, let's pressure test this idea of like Daryl as an evolving GM and his decision-making process. When you each look at the roster that is built for the Sixers going into this season, and when you compare it to, let's say, a Houston roster from the heart of that tenure in Houston, can we map 1-to-1 onto that? Obviously not same players, but same sort of like structural scaffolding for how to build a team.
A lot of the same players.
PJ Tucker, James Harden. But like, do you see an evolution in Daryl Morey in terms of like pieces that he has where you're like, that's an interesting Daryl Morey player?
Well, I think the question is, are they a 16-win team or an 82-game team? And to the Draymond Green ethos of like, there are 16-win players who win at the highest moments in the biggest games in the playoffs. And then there are guys who want to win as many games in the regular season, but don't know how to win when the lights are brightest. That's going to be the big question here is James Harden and his shortcomings in the playoffs and Joel Embiid, are those luck based that they just didn't have the right supporting cast, or if they don't miss those 27 straight shots and Chris Paul doesn't pull his hammy? On the other side, Andre Iguodala got hurt in that series, by the way. I'm always quick to mention.
Yes.
Like, is this a matter of, hey, we just need 100 plate appearances and then we will start seeing my average go up to over 300? Like, do we need more hacks at this thing in order for the true talent level to breathe through? We need a larger sample size. And my question is, I think we've seen enough of James Harden and Joel Embiid to know that their bodies are not in tip-top shape and they're not equipped to handle the 16-win postseason as much as other players are. So we need to see that. And I don't know if that's a Daryl Morey question or a medical question or a coaching question.
Right.
It's just, for me, it all involves those two players and whether they can last for those 16 wins.
What Tom said. Is it Daryl Morey, or is it the medical of these two guys who are in different places in their life cycles, but also have had their fair share of issues physically? Is it a fit thing? Because, Kate, you asked us to compare and contrast from the heart of the Houston kind of dynasty or whatever, or that greatness that they had there. I would say, at least in Houston, I knew how they were going to play. I knew there was a complete a clear path to their style of play, the roles and everything. And right now in Philadelphia, I know it's only been a week into the NBA season. I don't know what this team is supposed to be, because on the one hand, you have perhaps the most dominant center in the game, arguably the most dominant center in the game. And on the other hand, you have a guy who's a former MVP and extremely talented, who plays a certain style. And so how do you marry those two styles? How do you keep the big man involved and engaged while also taking advantage of this incredible one-on-one talent that Daryl has called a better scorer than Michael Jordan, by the way? He said that before, and KOC brought it up in the feature. So there's a lot of balancing there that they didn't necessarily have to do in Houston. In Houston, they knew how they were going to play. Now we just got to go out there and win the games. Whereas right now in Philadelphia, there is a level of, wait, what are we doing again?
Wait, that seems like maybe it's pointing to, and this could be rose-colored glasses, maybe it's pointing to an evolution in Daryl Morey, in that he's relying on chemistry and intangibles to take this something and focus it into what it's going to be, versus in Houston. Or do you think I'm just sort of like trying to make something up now?
Jeremy just hit us up.
I'm laughing at Jeremy's update. Just looked at about as many ages as I could find. And Morey's older than like 10 guys, and another 10 or so are in their 50s, and a handful of 65 to 70-year-olds. That sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay. So he's probably like right in the middle of the pack in terms of age.
Yep.
Yeah.
Daryl Morey is a gem. Well, I guess, yes, to that point, I don't know if it's a point I'm making or an observation. If there is no clear vision of what the Sixers are, and we are allowing the season to dictate how they play and who they are, that seems very anti-Morey.
Ooh, so this is where basketball Illuminati comes in.
Get that third eye warmed up.
Make that plug, and then we're out.
As soon as we launch the podcast, which you can download on any platform, we were pointing out that Daryl Morey didn't hire Doc Rivers.
Nope.
Doc Rivers was hired before Daryl got there. And that usually does not work out. There's going to be one or the other. Doc Rivers is going to stay, or Daryl Morey is going to kick him to the curb and find someone else. Maybe Mike D'Antoni. So that's the question for me is, how invested is Daryl Morey in the head coach that he did not hire? It usually takes a season or two for a new GM or executive to say, you know what, this is my head coach. This is my guy. I love you, Doc, but I didn't hire you. I think we need to go in a different direction. And as soon as that record of 15 straight seasons without a losing season is in jeopardy, I think you might see some transactions being done.
I don't even think it's going to take that long. I think just it being not quite what they imagined, because they imagined, hey, we went out, we got the pieces. Now we're going to compete for a championship. We're going to be up there with Milwaukee and Boston as the cream of the conference. If we're at Christmas and this thing is middling and not because someone's hurt or out, I think we might see a change right then and there, because as Tom said, this league has taught us anything. It's that when a new homeowner buys a house, they want to paint the walls. They want to blow out this kitchen. They want to make this into a his and her sink in the bathroom. They're not going to just say, "Oh, this is perfect. I'm going to do everything as it was." And so the coach is usually one of the changes that we see when we get a new chief basketball decision maker in there.
All right. I think we can wrap it there. Amin, Tom, thanks for joining. I guess the takeaway is attack the gaps. I think that is my clear takeaway.
Don't drive on the shoulder, Kate. Don't be that person.
What if your flight's taking off in like an hour 20 and you just got to get there?
Well, we know what Daryl's answer would be.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Just get out of traffic and just start running.